She mocked her neighbor every day, never imagining the tables would turn. But when her life fell apart, the person she humiliated became her only hope. What happened next will leave you speechless. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The woman who spent every day mocking and belittling her neighbor, never holding back her harsh words, couldn't have imagined how quickly her world would change. For years she found reasons to put her down, her appearance, her work, her very existence. She thought herself superior, never considering the pain her words might carry. But life, unpredictable as it is, has a way of turning tables. Revelation comes back to the person. One fateful day, her seemingly perfect life shattered. A job loss, mounting bills, and the growing despair of no options left her drowning in her own misfortune. And then, when all hope seemed lost, the very person she humiliated stepped forward. Not with anger, but with an open heart and an offer of help that would change everything. Gabrielle Milton sought the help of her son, suspecting even then he was making a mistake to ask for help. The truth she would uncover about this woman's life, her strength, and her kindness would leave her speechless. And as the pieces of the puzzle came together, she realized how blind she had been to her own flaws. What began as a story of arrogance and ridicule would become one of transformation, redemption, and the undeniable power of kindness. Would she take this chance to rebuild herself, or let her pride keep her broken? The suburban neighborhood buzzed with its usual rhythm on a sunny afternoon. Children laughed as they played hopscotch on the sidewalk, and neighbors exchanged pleasantries while tending to their pristine lawns. On the surface, everything seemed idyllic, a picture-perfect representation of middle-class life. But beneath the serenity lay unspoken tensions, particularly between two residents whose paths crossed daily. Nancy Miller was a woman who thrived on judgment. In her early 40s, she carried herself with an air of superiority, often dressing sharply even for mundane errands. Her sharp tongue and judgmental attitude made her the self-appointed critic of the neighborhood. Nancy never missed a chance to cast a sneer or deliver a biting remark, particularly at her black neighbor Tamara Jones. Tamara, in her 30s, was everything Nancy secretly envied: confident, composed, and unfailingly kind. She exuded a quiet grace that belied her success as a businesswoman. Yet despite Tamara's accomplishments, Nancy saw only what her biases allowed. She often scoffed as Tamara passed by, muttering under her breath, or sometimes loudly enough to be heard. "Do you people even work?" Nancy had once sneered with a derisive chuckle, watching Tamara return from her morning jog. Tamara, unshaken, would smile politely and continue on her way. This dynamic was a routine Nancy relished. To her, Tamara's reserved demeanor meant weakness, a license to ridicule without consequence. But what Nancy didn't know was that Tamara chose silence, not out of submission, but strength. She believed in letting action speak louder than words. One fateful morning, Nancy's world began to unravel. She received a call that left her pale and breathless. The company she had worked for over a decade was downsizing, and her position was among the first to be cut. The news hit her like a blow to the chest. At first, she put on a brave face, telling herself she'd find another job quickly. But as days turned into weeks, Rejection after rejection piled up, and her savings dwindled. The neighborhood that once felt like her domain now became a source of shame. Nancy avoided her neighbors, fearing judgment. Even Tamara's cheerful smile as she jogged past seemed like a mocking reminder of Nancy's deteriorating life. The bills mounted, her carefully curated appearance began to slip, and the once confident Nancy found herself spiraling into despair. She sat in her dimly lit living room one evening, staring at an overdue utility bill. The house, which had once been her pride, felt like a looming threat now. A knock at the door startled her. Opening it cautiously, she found Tamara standing there, holding a small potted plant. Her smile was warm, as always. "Hi, Nancy. I just wanted to check in. I noticed you haven't been outside much lately," Tamara said gently. Nancy's first instinct was to snap back, to deflect her embarrassment with hostility. "I'm fine," she said curtly. "Don't you have anything better to do?" Tamara hesitated, but didn't lose her composure. "If you ever need to talk, I'm just a few doors down," she offered before turning to leave. End of letter. Nancy closed the door, her chest tightening with conflicting emotions. As much as she wanted to reject Tamara's kindness, a part of her was struck by the genuine concern in her voice. For the first time, Nancy felt the cracks in her armor. The woman she had spent so long belittling was the only one who seemed to notice her pain. Inside, Nancy sank into her chair, tears brimming in her eyes. Her pride wouldn't let her admit it, but she was crumbling. And though she couldn't yet articulate it, a seed of doubt about her actions had been planted, one that would soon grow into something much larger. And the days bled into weeks, and Nancy found herself sinking further into despair. Each morning she scrolled through job postings, sending out applications only to be met with silence or rejection. The savings she once thought would sustain her evaporated under the weight of overdue bills and mounting expenses. Her once pristine lawn grew wild and unruly, a reflection of her inner turmoil. Nights were the hardest, silent and long, filled with worry about how she would make it through another day. The proud woman who once held her head high now moved through life with a slouched posture and downcast eyes. Even small errands became unbearable. Every glance from a neighbor felt like silent judgment. She avoided Tamara in particular, refusing to make eye contact whenever they crossed paths. Seeing Tamara's steady confidence, her composed demeanor, only highlighted Nancy's spiraling state. Tamara, however, noticed everything: the unkempt yard, the dim lights at night, the noticeable absence of Nancy's usual sharp remarks. Though Nancy had never treated her with kindness, Tamara felt a quiet pull to help. One late afternoon, she decided to check in. Walking up Nancy's driveway, Tamara hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. The sound echoed in the quiet house. After a long pause, the door opened just a crack, revealing Nancy's tired, pale face. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression wary. "What do you want?" Nancy snapped, her tone sharper than she intended. She instinctively crossed her arms, as if bracing herself for whatever Tamara was about to say. "I just wanted to check on you," Tamara said softly, her voice laced with genuine concern. "You've been keeping to yourself lately, and I thought you might need something." Nancy's defenses shot up instantly. "Why? So you can gloat? Show me how much better off you are?" "I don't need your pity," she spat, her voice trembling more from shame than anger. Tamara stood still, unflinching, Her calm demeanor only made Nancy feel more exposed. "I'm not here to gloat, Nancy," Tamara replied. "I just wanted to help if I can." Nancy's eyes flickered with conflicting emotions: pride, anger, and something softer she didn't want to acknowledge. She slammed the door without another word, leaning against it as tears welled up in her eyes. Why couldn't Tamara just leave her alone? Why did her kindness sting more than any insult? Tamara lingered on the porch for a moment before turning to leave. "If you ever need anything," she said quietly through the closed door, "I'm just a few houses down." She rang me up later. Inside, Nancy slid to the floor, burying her face in her hands. She hated how far she had fallen, how her life had unraveled so completely, and most of all, she hated the flicker of gratitude she felt for Tamara's offer. It was a bitter reminder of how undeserving she was of such kindness. The breaking point came a few days later. Nancy had just received another rejection email, this time for a job she thought she had a real chance at. Her fridge was nearly empty, her utilities were on the verge of being cut off, and the loneliness of her situation became unbearable. Sitting in her darkened living room, she realized she had no one to turn to. Swallowing her pride felt like choking on a bitter pill, but Nancy forced herself to her feet. With trembling hands, she walked down the street to Tamara's house. Every step felt heavier than the last, her mind racing with doubts. She rehearsed what she might say, but couldn't settle on the right word. When she finally reached Tamara's door, she stood there for a moment, frozen. Before she could talk herself out of it, she knocked, lightly. The door opened almost immediately, as if Tamara had been expecting her. "Nancy," Tamara said, her tone warm and surprised. "What brings you here?" Nancy stared at the ground, unable to meet Tamara's gaze. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I need help," she said, the words feeling like shards of glass in her throat. "I don't know what else to do." Tamara's face softened, and she stepped aside, gesturing for Nancy to come in. "Let's sit down," she said gently. Nancy hesitated for a moment before stepping into the house, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her shame. As she sat across from Tamara, she finally allowed herself to meet the other woman's eyes. They weren't filled with judgment or pity, just genuine care. "I don't deserve this," Nancy muttered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "After everything I've said to you, everything I've done." "Whoa." Tamara reached out, placing a comforting hand on Nancy's. "Everyone deserves help, Nancy. No one should have to go through something like this alone." For the first time in weeks, Nancy felt a glimmer of hope. In the quiet warmth of Tamara's home, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Tamara sat across from Nancy, her calm presence creating a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within Nancy. Tears streamed down Nancy's face as she recounted the series of events that had led to her dire situation. Her job loss, the mounting bills, and the creeping isolation that had taken over her life. Her voice cracked as she admitted, "I don't even know how I'll pay for groceries next week. I've applied everywhere, but no one wants to hire someone my age." Tamara listened intently, her expression a mix of empathy and quiet determination. When Nancy finished, Tamara leaned forward slightly and said, "Nancy, you don't have to go through this alone. Let me help you." Nancy's head shot up, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Why? After everything I've said to you? After the way I've treated you?" she stammered, her voice trembling with guilt. Tamara gave her a calm, reassuring smile. Because that's what neighbors do. Everyone deserves a second chance. Nancy's lower lip quivered, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She had spent years sneering at Tamara, belittling her, and making assumptions about her life. And yet, here Tamara was, extending a lifeline without hesitation. I know some people who are hiring, Tamara continued. Give me a couple of days and I'll set up an interview for you. It's with a good company, reputable, stable. I think you'd be a great fit. Nancy's initial response was defensive, almost instinctive. Why would they hire someone like me? I don't have any fancy degrees or impressive experience. Tamara shook her head gently. What they're looking for is someone reliable, hardworking, and willing to learn. You fit that description, Nancy. You just need to believe it yourself. Nancy's defenses softened, and she nodded hesitantly. I'll try, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. True to her word, Tamara used her extensive network to secure Nancy an interview at a well-regarded company. The night before the meeting, Nancy stood in front of her bathroom mirror, practicing her responses and smoothing down her only professional blazer. The anxiety was almost paralyzing, but she couldn't deny the small flicker of hope she felt. Something she hadn't experienced in weeks. The interview went better than she expected. The hiring manager seemed impressed with her experience and work ethic, and within days she received the call she had been waiting for. She got the job. For the first time in months, Nancy felt the weight on her shoulders lift slightly. It wasn't just a paycheck. It was a chance to rebuild her life. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Nancy decided to visit Tamara at her workplace to thank her in person. She arrived at the address Tamara had provided, a sleek office building in the city's business district. As she entered the lobby, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The space was bright and modern, with large glass windows that offered a panoramic view of the skyline. Approaching the reception desk, she glanced at the nameplate sitting prominently on the counter. Tamara Jones, CEO, TJ Enterprises. Nancy froze, her breath catching in her throat. The name repeated in her mind like an echo. CEO? Her heart raced as the realization sank in. The woman she had ridiculed for years wasn't just her neighbor. She was a successful businesswoman who owned multiple companies. Before she could fully process the information, Tamara emerged from an office down the hall, her warm smile immediately lighting up the room. "Nancy," she greeted, her voice as kind as ever. "What brings you here?" Nancy stared at her, wide-eyed and speechless. You're the CEO?" she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Tamara's smile didn't waver. "I am. But that doesn't change anything, Nancy." Tears welled up in Nancy's eyes as a wave of shame and gratitude washed over her. "I've spent years judging you, mocking you, and all this time, you were..." Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. "I don't even have the words to apologize." Tamara stepped closer, gently placing a hand on Nancy's shoulder. "Nancy," she said softly, "I never held your words against you. We all go through hard times, and sometimes that makes us see the world differently. What matters is how we move forward." Nancy lowered her hands, her tear-streaked face filled with a mixture of guilt and admiration. "You didn't have to help me. After everything I did, you still chose to be kind. Why? Tamara's smile turned wistful. Because kindness is never about what someone deserves. It's about what they need. And I've learned that the best way to break down walls is to meet them with grace. The two women stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Tamara's words settling over them. Nancy felt a warmth she hadn't known in years, a sense of connection and understanding that transcended their past. "Thank you," Nancy whispered, her voice trembling with sincerity, "for everything." Tamara nodded, her eyes gentle. "You're welcome." That moment marked a turning point for Nancy. It wasn't just about the job or the help Tamara had given her. It was about the profound lesson she had learned. The person she had spent years underestimating had shown her the power of grace, forgiveness, and quiet strength. And for the first time, Nancy felt the stirrings of a change she knew she had to embrace. Nancy sat across from Tamara on the sun-dappled porch, her hands trembling as she clutched the warm cup of tea Tamara had handed her. The scent of jasmine filled the air, mingling with the distant laughter of children playing in the neighborhood. For the first time in years, Nancy felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. A peace born from the forgiveness she had received and the lessons she had learned. Tears welled in her eyes as she finally mustered the courage to say what had been weighing on her heart. "Tamara," she began, her voice shaking, "I don't even know where to start. I've been so awful to you for so long. I judged you, mocked you, and made assumptions that were so wrong. I'm so sorry for everything I've said and done." Tamara's calm, warm gaze met Nancy's. "Nancy," she said softly, "it's not about what you said or did. It's about how we move forward. Anger doesn't fix anything. Kindness does. Even if it's hard. We need to be merciful to each other and speak kindly." Nancy's tears spilled over as she placed her cup down, her hands covering her face. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered, her words muffled by her sobs. Tamara leaned forward and gently placed a hand on Nancy's shoulder. "Kindness isn't something you earn, Nancy. It's something we give, especially when it's hardest to do so. What matters is that you're here now, willing to change. That's all anyone can ask." Nancy lowered her hands, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the gentle sincerity in Tamara's expression. "You've shown me so much more than I deserve," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm going to do better, I promise." Tamara smiled, the kind of smile that carried no resentment, only grace. "We all have our moments, Nancy. What matters is that we grow from them." In the days and weeks that followed, Nancy held true to her promise. She began treating Tamara with respect, gratitude, and even admiration. No longer blinded by her biases, she saw Tamara for who she truly was, a strong, compassionate, and generous woman who had changed her life in ways she never thought possible. Nancy started speaking openly with her neighbors, acknowledging her mistakes. At block parties and casual gatherings, she told her story, not out of a sense of obligation, but because she wanted others to learn from her journey. "I was wrong about Tamara," she'd say earnestly. "She's not just my neighbor, she's my friend. And I'll never forget what she's done for me." The transformation didn't go unnoticed. The neighbors, once wary of Nancy's sharp tongue and judgmental demeanor, began to see a softer side of her. They too started approaching Tamara with more warmth and appreciation, inspired by Nancy's change of heart. One sunny afternoon, Nancy and Tamara sat on the porch together, sipping tea and watching the children play tag on the freshly mowed lawns. The world seemed brighter, as if reflecting the newfound peace in Nancy's heart. She turned to Tamara, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You've taught me more about kindness than anyone ever has," she said. "You've shown me what it means to be truly strong." Tamara smiled, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "We all learn in our own time," she replied. "And sometimes the hardest lessons leave the most lasting impact." Nancy nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had spent years trapped in a mindset of prejudice and judgment, only to be freed by the very person she had wronged. Tamara's quiet strength and unwavering kindness had not only saved Nancy in her darkest hour, but had also transformed her into someone she was finally proud to be. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues over the neighborhood, Nancy reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the shame she had once felt, the anger that had clouded her judgment, and the grace Tamara had extended despite it all. In that moment, a simple but profound truth settled in her heart. Sometimes, the people we judge the harshest are the ones who change our lives in the most unexpected and meaningful ways. With a deep breath, Nancy looked at Tamara and said, "I hope I can repay your kindness someday." Tamara chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling. "You already have, Nancy, by choosing to see the world differently." As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of amber and pink, Nancy felt a sense of hope and purpose she hadn't known in years. She realized that the power of kindness and forgiveness could heal even the deepest wounds, and that one person's grace could ripple out to change an entire community. For Nancy, the past was a lesson, the present a gift, and the future a chance to live with a heart open to understanding, connection, and love. Empathy flows effortlessly through the narrative of Nancy and Tamara's story. Nancy's downfall, riddled with misjudgments and unspoken insecurities, resonates deeply with anyone who has faced moments of failure or shame. Her transformation from a prejudiced, judgmental neighbor to a grateful and self-reflective individual inspires viewers to believe in the power of change. Empathy is the perpetual surprise, existence itself. People connect with her vulnerability and feel invested in her redemption arc, rooting for her as she learns the value of kindness and humility. Tamara's unwavering grace and compassion make her a beacon of inspiration. Despite enduring Nancy's cruel words for years, she rises above hatred, offering forgiveness and support when Nancy needs it most. Her kindness serves as a reminder of the profound impact empathy can have, even in the face of prejudice. Viewers are inspired by her ability to see beyond harsh words and focus on healing rather than retaliating. The story's ultimate life lesson strikes a universal chord. Judgments based on race, appearances, or assumptions only serve to divide us, while kindness and understanding can unite and heal. It encourages viewers to pause and reflect on their own actions and perceptions, planting the seed for change in their own lives. The call to action makes this connection even more tangible. It invites the audience to share their own stories of being judged or learning to overcome biases, fostering a sense of community and shared experiences. This not only engages viewers on a personal level, but also encourages meaningful discussions that amplify the story's message. Have you ever judged someone unfairly or felt the sting of prejudice yourself? Share your story in the comments below. Your words could inspire someone else to see the world differently. And if you loved this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more uplifting tales that remind us of the power of kindness and understanding.